high performance housing is looked at related to energy use. We take a more holistic definition of that to look at energy use, but also look at it over the long term. So we are thinking about how long houses are going to last, the durability of those houses, how easy they are for people to maintain and live there. We're looking for houses that are more helpful for people to live in, as well as resource conscious, having to do with energy, materials, water, conservation across the board. And I guess the first question is, how does high performance housing relate to human rights? Or maybe starting with the question of whether housing is a human right at all. So in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came together to establish a common standard of achievements for all people and all nations. And that included housing. But it looks at housing related to food, clothing, medical care, social services, all of the things that affect our quality of life. Expanding on that, there have been several UN conferences that look at sustainable development goals and specifically housing to really understand how international human rights laws can recognize adequate standards of life for everyone, but that includes adequate housing. And so the habitat agenda, there have been 3 meetings over the years that have been specifically focused on habitat. And what does that mean? Relating shelter to sustainable development. And in the second meeting in 1996, that really focused on the actions that we have to take, the role that government has, but also the limitations that government plays in that story and what the actions that we all need to take. So what does adequate housing mean in our context? Generally, it is paralleled with affordability. And in the United States, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development has developed a definition, which is sort of the national standard. It says that people shouldn't have to pay 30%, more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And that means all housing costs, not just what you pay for rent or for your mortgage, but all of the expenses to actually live in that home. So what does that look like? Well, here in Center County, affordable housing is actually quite difficult. Majority of our workforce, our teachers, our police officers, actually don't make a salary that allow them to pay the rents or to purchase a home within the region, which pushes them outside of the region in order to have to live, which actually, you know, has a huge effect on the triple bottom line of sustainability. So economically, if they don't have a car, they don't have access to public transportation, how are they going to get to work to have the money that they need to live? Which obviously has an effect on their social life and family life and everything else. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. 30% of overall costs, what you make, should go towards housing. 6% of that, I don't have enough fingers if I'm holding this, but 6% of that 30% is what has been basically assigned as the maximum amount that somebody should have to pay for energy expenses. And in our climate, a pretty heating dominant climate, we need a lot of heat and a lot of energy to produce heat. Only 2% of your salary should go towards paying for heat, of that 30% of your salary. So a law firm has been annually looking at something that is called the home energy affordability gap. And what they have determined is that actually a great deal of the population, even people that are at 200% of the medium income for the region are actually paying far more than the amounts that I just dictated for their housing expenses. And that starts to get pretty ugly, especially when we're looking at people in the 50% poverty level. As of 2016, what this research has determined is that people are paying 28% of their household income for energy costs associated with living alone. That actually is pretty good because 2 years ago, in 2015, it was at 33% of income, and last year it was 30%. So it's actually getting a little bit better, but not good enough to keep people from having to make dangerous choices sometimes about where to spend their money. Do you put heat in the house, or do you put food on the table for the kids? If you're elderly, do you provide the heat that you need, or do you go out and buy your medication? So this really does have implications across the board. So I want to quickly just look at the role of government and what that looks like related to these UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is a study that we conducted to look specifically at how energy has been considered in housing policy over the years. So the first Housing Act of 1937, which was a fairly short document, but it did outline this definition of affordable housing, and it was not very in-depth, but it talked about a holistic view of affordability, including heat, light, water, and cooking fuel. That document that came out in 1937 was largely informed by a woman called Catherine Bauer, known as one of the first housers. So Catherine Bauer was mostly a writer, but she was very much informed by an important mentor called Lewis Mumford, who was an architecture and urban critic, wrote extensively about urban design and the importance of urban design. And he convinced Catherine Bauer that if she was going to make a change, she needed to go over to Europe post-World War I and look at what architects over there were doing related to housing and urban design. And so specifically, she was looking at something called the garden cities that Ebenezer Howard was developing, and the housing of people like Walter Gropius and others post-World War I. And they were really thinking about housing holistically, industrialization, zoning, so that people could live close to where they work, but it could be cleaner, healthier environment. Those of you who can read plans, these are diagrams of buildings, and you can see what they were looking at was really orienting these houses so that they were maximizing the amount of daylight and happier places for people to live. Oftentimes, they also included direct connections to the ability to grow your own food. So food and health and water was considered. But there were also people that really questioned whether government should be getting involved in social housing at all, and whether that was a responsibility, and really trying to prioritize housing and the development of home ownership. And that has always been something that has been consistent with our energy policies, as you'll see. So the housing acts really developed in these early years to take advantage and create jobs for people. And that continued into the 1950s to some extent, although there was a decline in funding going towards social housing. And we were also seeing a huge need for housing post-World War II and a suburbanization where housing development was largely being industrialized and informed by industrial processes and post-World War, which was moving away from the city centers, which was starting to degrade them. So at the same time that we were seeing the Civil Rights Acts emerge, we were also seeing people moving out of the cities, which was causing basically segregation and not ideal conditions within the cities. At this time, the community development block grants emerged as a major way of funding projects, and this was linked to community development, to just trying to make places better, cities better places for people to live. And that's going to come back around and become important. Throughout the 80s, we continued to kind of gut the funding that was going into housing. And we really saw at this time money moving away, but a grassroots approach, people stepping up into action to take some responsibility for the housing that we develop and how that moves forward. This was largely encouraged through architecture competitions. We were also seeing, of course, with the oil crisis, some concentration being put towards really thinking about energy use in buildings and transportation sectors, and specifically the emergence of the Institute for Building Science and looking at energy performance goals. In the 90s, a movement emerged which was known as New Urbanism. And in architecture, this was a really important time because basically a group of architects and designers and planners came together and they said, you know what? There was something about the historic cores of cities that we should be valuing in the density of how people live, in the diversity that was encouraged by a lot of people living close together, the transportation, the walkability of these places. We need to be designing in such a way that we are valuing those relationships. And those goals of new urbanism really emerged into what we now refer to as smart growth. Smart growth is aligned specifically with those sustainable development goals. So this was a fairly important just in terms of the specifics of the way that designs emerge and how we move forward. In the 2000s, there really continued to be this effort towards alignment of weatherization, improving energy performance, but also creating jobs for people. And so a lot of what was going into the funding for weatherization, for example, of existing housing projects was coming from Recovery and Reinvestment Act money and went towards weatherization assistance programs. This was paralleled with improvements in our international energy conservation codes. And most recently, our community development block grant funding has come back around in the form of disaster recovery funds. Because the fact of the matter is we are being increasingly affected by storms and pretty poor conditions that are affecting quality of life, directly affecting housing. And so funding is being directed in that way, or at least was in the last administration. One of the Director Donovan of HUD during the Obama administration was actually trained as an architect. And so he paralleled opportunities to look at community design, including housing, that can be more resilient to storms, to floods. So there were a number of rebuild by design competitions, the most recent one happening right now in San Francisco, that were looking specifically at these issues and what design can do to actually affect change. Everything going okay? Yeah. All right. Everything going okay with you? I promise I have hopefully more interesting things as we move forward. But what does this look like? Actually, in some ways it's not so bad. Some of the codes that we've put into place, the things that we've implemented have actually started to have improvements, that we're starting to see improvements in energy use, especially in the residential sector, where things have essentially leveled out as a result of the energy codes that went into place in the mid-1990s and moving forward. So we see things go up a little bit, but then essentially level out. But collectively, we're still seeing a lot of energy going to the building sector, resulting in a lot of greenhouse gases related to climate change, et cetera. So here's the reason for that hump and leveling. A lot of that had to do with the Department of Energy and the EPA getting involved with setting energy standards, especially for appliances, the Energy Star program, and mandating that program. So during that time of the hump was the time that people were starting to change over to more efficient energy equipment. And then as a result, that's allowed us to kind of level out the amount of energy use. The Energy Information Administration is basically saying, okay, heating equipment has gotten more efficient, but people are also moving to more warmer climates, which is resulting in air conditioning going up, for example. But we also see something interesting here, because standards due to Energy Star for appliances, lighting, and electronics have actually brought down significantly the amount of energy that they use, but we're seeing the amount of energy go up. So why is that? Well, in the words of Dr. Seuss, it's because we keep biggering and biggering and biggering our houses, even as our family sizes in the United States are going down. And so obviously everything that you put in those larger houses uses energy, as does the space within the houses themselves. And so this does have a result. Actually, the greenhouse gas tables don't look too bad, but in fact, it's hard to see what the impact is, and it's fairly significant. So homes and businesses account for approximately 12% of the US greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look holistically at the electricity use in housing, that's more like 29%. So within the design professions, we've been challenged with something called the Architecture 2030 Challenge, which basically looks at what we need to do in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings between now and 2030 in order to meet targets for reductions in greenhouse gas. So what does that mean? A lot of my discussion today is going to be about new construction, but we really need to look at that in the context of not just what we do up front to build those homes, but the way we live in those homes. So these studies might be a little out of date, but I think the numbers are still on target, and thanks to my friend and colleague Alan Kimmel in the back for helping with some of these studies. So this was actually a study that was looked at with residential construction 10 years apart. And it basically says that in those 10 years, the amount of energy that goes into building construction of the homes is indicated in blue. I should have put a key on this. My students that are in the back, keep this in mind. I didn't have a key on my drawings. Green is indicating the use, and then white is the end of life of those homes and the amount of greenhouse gases and energy use of those homes over time. Mostly I want to show this to say, hey, it's getting better, but we're not really changing all that much and not quickly enough. But also to say, okay, but what can the impact be? So this is that voluntary Energy Star program that was developed by the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Organization. And they basically put into place a program that certified homes in addition to appliances. It is a voluntary program. It's not mandatory, so we're not seeing it across the board. But basically that allows for, by following the recommendations for Energy Star homes, we can reduce the amount of energy that's used by 30% over a code home. New ideas or more aggressive strategies, such as the passive house system, actually reduce that significantly. And this is really an active movement to really begin to look at how can we think about the first cost so that we build our homes in such a way that we reduce energy use over the long term. So what we're seeing on the left here is a simple diagram that was developed by ResNet that's called the HERS score, the Home Energy Rating Score. And basically what we're looking at here is 100% is defined as a 2006 International Energy Code home. So a home that's just built to sort of the minimum allowable code today. Most of our homes, of course, have been built before that and are using significantly more energy, but the goal is to try and reduce the amount of energy we use to get to the point that we don't need to be using external energy for our everyday needs. And so these are sort of the codes and the programs that are in place that allow us to get there. So the Department of Energy developed this diagram to say, okay, well, you know, base should really be up from 2006. We're at the International Energy Conservation Code is currently 2015. 2006 or 2009 are generally the base standard. But up from that, we should be looking at Energy Star. But really, where we're going is this next tier up of what the Department of Energy has defined as NetZero energy ready homes. And this really looks a little bit more holistically at energy, at indoor air quality, at water quality, at all of the things that we need to create healthful, enjoyable places for people to live that are comfortable and low cost to live in. And then, of course, at the top of the stair, we see those most assertive passive house standards. But with regard to the devastating tragedies that we've been seeing related to storms and increasing numbers of storms related to climate change, we need to look even more holistically at this. So this is looking at 100% commitment to the Department of Energy's zero energy ready home requirements, but underneath that is the passive house, looking at really super insulated homes, making sure that we get our buildings as tight as possible, but still create the things that need to be in place to make them healthy, but also looking at water and reducing the amount of water that we use and using water more efficiently, also thinking about the amount of electricity that actually goes into bringing us our water and getting that water up to the temperatures that we need it to be. But also looking at safer homes, disaster resilience, as well as long-term management practices. And these have all been packaged together in something called passive survivability. Really thinking about housing as a buffer, as something that can protect us in the event of a long-term power outage or a storm, that we can shelter in place, that we can remain safe and reasonably comfortable through that, and what we can do to design. But what that means is, again, we need to look at this holistically, because it's only through things like those energy improvements that we reduce the amount of energy dependence we have, and we get to a point that renewable energy and other technologies can be put into place to bring that goal down to zero, and then through passive strategies being able to live out the storm, if you will. So, everyone with me? Any questions? Is this cool? Is this the kind of thing you're interested in? I'm going to get into more of the things that students have actually been doing to impact this. So hopefully it'll get more interesting for you. But you know, I wasn't sure exactly where to go with this, because back in the summer when this invitation to speak was extended to me, they said, yeah, will you come and speak about high performance homes? Okay, I said, sure. That's pretty specific though. And then on Wednesday I got a phone call and they said, yeah, we want you to talk about high-performance homes, but make sure that you keep it as sort of a broad, don't get too deep into the weeds. I said, all right, well, really specific, but how do we do that? So I'm going to just, by way of example, go into 3 emerging trends that I think are really moving towards allowing for these improvements and showcase them with work that students have been doing. And if you want to get a little bit more into the specifics of ways that you can realize these things, I recommend this book, Retooling the U.S. Housing Industry by Sam Raskin. So Raskin is the architect behind the DOE's Energy Start program. And so basically he wrote this book. It's a little sloppy. There's a couple things in there that are not quite right. I think they're typos, but so just be aware as you're reading. But it does put together the big picture and get into some of the specifics for you. But what I'd like to concentrate on a little bit is embracing smaller homes for hopefully the reasons I outlined, considering the environment to provide improved air quality, greater durability, and more sustainable, greener homes, and effectively engaging new resident demographics and advancing housing in general by providing technology-savvy homes. So with the do-it-yourself movement, as well as millennials, we are seeing some movement towards housing getting smaller. There's a real push in interest in, especially, I guess there's at least one television show about what are called tiny homes, and what you can do to really use design to have a tiny space and make it as livable and efficient as possible. In places, cities like New York City and Toronto and mega cities in Asia, fact of the matter, by necessity, houses are getting smaller and smaller. Apartments are getting smaller and smaller. It's not necessarily, we can talk about affordability here and whether that's actually making for more affordable housing. But regardless, this is a trend. So we're seeing high levels of design thinking in smaller spaces. But what this also means is that our homes are not a bubble. We need to be looking outside of the homes for the community connections, because unless you have the amenities that you desire, whether it's being able to move your tiny house to a beautiful setting, or being able to share a kitchen or go outside to a large park, if you live in a micro apartment, you need to have these amenities. You need to have this larger contact and this connection to the outside. So what are we doing here at Penn State? Well, last year, this program called the PSU Tiny House Project emerged. And there's a couple of tiny houses that are currently being built. Anyone involved? Tiny house? Okay, great. So I'm pointing people out that if you have questions about any of these programs, you can kind of approach after and we can talk more as well. So my understanding, I've seen this guy now in Philadelphia out at the Navy Yard this past summer. It was out in Montana as part of the American Indian Housing Initiative. This is a lightweight, it's actually I'm not going to get into it, but the frame for this lightweight steel structure that they use to make this easily transportable is really innovative. Here on campus, through architecture professor James Kalsbeck, they've been looking at building a tiny house completely out of reclaimed materials. So that's a class that's going on right now, but it will also be offered next fall. So they're working on the exterior this semester. Next fall, they'll be working on the interiors of this tiny home design. Sustainable greener homes. We're going to just, take a look at small houses, but of a more marketable size, and look a little bit more at some of the goals for reducing energy use, et cetera. So the Department of Energy and Sam Raskin, related to that zero energy housing program, launched a competition a couple of years ago. The first year in 2014, it was known as the Challenge Home Competition. Any former challengers in the audience? Any racers in the audience? More recently, that's become, I know there's a couple racers in the audience. So more recently, in 2015, they changed the name of that to the Race to Zero competition, challenging students with actually realizing, what do we need in order to make this work? So Penn State has actually been participating every year since the competition has existed, and the diversity of our team, the number of students from across campus has really grown, and it's been quite a nice learning opportunity for the students. So we'll just dig into last year's competition entry a little bit. This was, so one of the things to note is in order to understand what does our market need, what is affordable, energy efficient, well, let's just leave it at affordable. What does affordable housing mean here in the short term and the long term? We've been working with community partners, local affordable housing organizations every year in order to be affordable housing and other housing organizations and decision makers to really understand what does that mean. And so in the first year, we were partnered with Columbia County Housing Authority. I'll talk a little bit about our collaboration with here in the borough with the State College Community Land Trust. We work with partners in Union County in 2016, and last year it was actually, okay, how can we have a larger impact? So the group actually partnered with Ferguson Township in order to look at some connected homes on a development that's happening in Ferguson Township, a phased development on a site that was formerly known as the Circleville Farm. It was a student-owned, it was a university-owned farm just outside of town here. And so the students said, okay, how can we remember that history of food, the need for food, what the history, the embedded history of that farming on the site, and think about the development of more effective homes. So they partnered with the Center County Housing and Land Trust. And Center County Housing and Land Trust is a local affordable housing provider for the larger region, and they are a partner with the developers on this site to be able to sell some of the homes that exist here to income qualified homeowners, workforce housing. So the students selected the typology that best met the needs of that group, and then worked through a series of community meetings to really get input on what does affordable housing mean to you? What is it that you need in a house? What could we give you that would allow you to use less energy but be more comfortable for longer? Paraphrasing a little bit, but at any rate, they used that input to actually inform what they designed into these homes. And so here you see just some of the strategies for reducing the first costs, reducing energy use through increased insulation in the homes, through making sure that we don't have cold air or moisture coming up through the ground and into our homes, to making sure that we don't have uncomfortable breezes and heat being lost or gained too much through our windows. And then once we've done all that, hopefully having homes that use less energy so that we can begin to think about PV panels or some sort of renewable energy on site, that, because that's kind of the tip of the pyramid. That's the really expensive stuff. So you don't want to be paying for PVs until you've done some of the improvements to bring energy use down. And then, since food production and other things was important here, being able to capture rainwater on site and use that in an efficient way. On the inside of the house, we see things like people's real need for storage. If we're going to make houses smaller, or something that's called right-sizing the houses. So yes, the houses are smaller, but we're using spaces more efficiently. We're really thinking about the connections that we're making between inside and outside to create rooms on the inside that can be more flexible in use so that people can use them more realistically to their needs. So here we see Energy Star appliances, keeping our systems inside the house and minimizing things like ducts and pipes running through the house, promise not to get into the weeds, lighting, some of the other strategies that are in place. And all of our Race to Zero submissions are online if you want to dig into any of them and look more closely. So this is just the, what the team was able to achieve. They actually looked at 3 houses of slightly different scale to say, well, what happens if we don't just look at one house individually, but look at those houses together? What would be the opportunity that we could create for saving energy? Would that allow for someone that doesn't have as much income to actually live here comfortably because it's perhaps being supported by the energy savings and the array, the solar array for electric generation on the roof of the larger, slightly larger home next door? But mostly what the team was interested in is this long-term living, the connections to the outdoors, that history back to what this site was and the ability to grow food and to really be able to be a part of your environment. I'm getting tired. You guys all okay? Okay. Any questions? Keep going? All right, thanks. This is a project that I hope that you'll all keep an eye on, because I've been told that excavators are on site for the first time this week to actually realize some of a duplex, 2 homes that were designed by the 2015 Race to Zero competition team. So this was a project, and I'm going to step back just a little bit. This was a project that was in partnership with the State College Community Land Trust. So the State College Community Land Trust has been in the borough of State College for past 30 years. In a borough where we don't really have much access to housing within the borough for people of limited incomes. And so they've been providing homes primarily by purchasing existing homes within our community, fixing those homes up, and then they sell them to income-qualified homeowners. So the other goal of this is to create home ownership in the borough, where rental apartments, especially for students, is the norm. But what they do is the land trust keeps the property in trust. So the homeowner owns the house. They can use the house as their own. They can make improvements to the house as long as they don't take it outside of the market of affordable housing. But what the land trust agreement does is it takes 30% off the top of the mortgage, because basically the residents don't own the land. They have a 99-year lease. They use it like it's their own. If you ask any of the homeowners, they don't, it doesn't matter to them that they don't own it. But what it assures is that these homes that the land trust purchases and sells to income-qualified homeowners stay as affordable housing in perpetuity. So if somebody is going to sell their home, they need to make sure that they sell it to either back to the land trust or to another income-qualified homeowner. And so they approached us back in the very end of 2013. They came to EEHR. I was on sabbatical, and I met with a couple of representatives from the land trust. And they said, we heard about the work that you've been doing, and we would really like to talk to you about how we can improve the energy efficiency of our existing housing stock. My talk today is about mostly what we can do with new construction, but obviously from that table you saw before, really thinking about how we can make improvements to existing housing stock is important. So we talked to them about a partnership we had with Union County Housing Authority, where we were looking at the energy improvements that were made to 2 existing homes, one from the 20s and one from the 50s, where we were able to insulate and improve the homes so that they went from being about 100, one was 130 and one was 160 on the HERS score, so 30 or 60% more energy used than a code home, to being a 68 and a 77 on the HERS score. So this was the first one we retrofitted at 77, and then we were able to learn from that and improve it further to 68. But at the same time we were doing that, we were also doing energy efficient net zero energy duplex for the Union County Housing Authority. So this is an image of it here on Market Street, intended to fit in with the existing community. But this was a home that was more than 50% improvement over a code home for a very reasonable budget, not really over existing costs. Okay, I'm going to move it ahead. So anyway, the students partnered. So right after we met with them, the Land Trust got this opportunity to buy a coveted parcel of land in the borough that had not been developed, but is in existing community development where there are duplex homes. And so they worked with the Race to Zero team to design a duplex, 2 attached homes on the site. The students submitted that for the 2014 competition. After the competition, the team continued to work with community stakeholders. There was a lot of snow on the site that year, so we were able to get out there and survey and really understand what the slope conditions were and work to realize a duplex that could maintain the individuality of the homeowners but have improved living. So we're actually looking at net zero energy homes without PVs on the roof. These homes are designed so that they'll be more than 70% improved over code, and we're actually looking at homes that will be net energy generators when the PV array is put onto the roof. So this was largely funded by the West Penn Energy Sustainability Fund, and they gave the Land Trust a low-income loan as well as a grant to realize this project. The mandate that we actually put the PVs on the roof. So the Land Trust, we were able to establish a memorandum of understanding so that the students' design work and research could be shared with the builder, and they put this out for bid to design build firms, and Invinity is realizing these homes. So they will be at 1394 University Drive. You'll be seeing them under construction for the next couple of months. And we're really hoping that these can be a symbol for the community of what is realizable here in State College, like the legacy tree that we're protecting on site that, you know, some gentleman that lived in the neighborhood protected for years and years. We're protecting it during construction. It will stay there, and hopefully these homes will go up as symbols of what we can do in terms of energy improvements in homes and general sustainability improvements that can be realized. So the final point that I wanted to make is engaging new demographics. The Sustainable Housing Initiative has actually been looking at how do we take big data from census information and energy information to look at the trends in housing and where we're going to in order to inform further development. But I want to point out another Department of Energy sponsored student competition, Solar Decathlon. I know there's a couple former decathletes in the room. So Penn State participated in the Department of Energy Solar Decathlon in 2007 and 2009 competition to design, build, and operate a totally net zero energy home, a home that can produce more energy than it uses. So one of them is here on campus as a living laboratory and classroom. So hopefully you've been there, yes? People have been to the Morning Star? Excellent. So it came back here as on campus to demonstrate integration of different technologies, but the concept for this home with a modular energy core and then a site-built construction was really used to think about other strategies. Our Solar Decathlon home, you'd have to really stretch it to call. Used the energy core that was close to one another. That core was shipped to site, and then a student team with the American Indian Housing Initiative built the living space according to passive design strategies and also traditional housing at the reservation using straw bale construction. More recently, the Grid Star House. Any interns at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia? Okay, awesome. As a part of a larger initiative to look at energy use in buildings and communities at the Philadelphia Navy Yard is the Grid Star home, a demonstration home for more energy efficient living and how that can interact with recent technologies for energy. The solar decathlon, the latest solar decathlon, they've been having these, first one is in 2002, and then 2005, and every 2 years thereafter in the United States. There's also now international solar decathlons in the off years. But last month, the solar decathlon happened in Denver, Colorado for the first time. And here's where students are really pushing towards understanding demographics, smart technology, and how that can be implemented in homes. So Missouri S&T Home has been involved in the competition since the beginning. And they were saying, okay, what about empty nesters? People are looking to downsize. How can they do that more efficiently? And how can smart technology help in perhaps transitioning to aging in place? So Team Daytona was looking at aging Gen Xers and creating a retirement home that people could live in, that could use smart technologies if they're not going to be there all the time in order to keep them safe and secure in their homes. And then Team Vegas was also looking at retirees and the idea that a home can actually be flexible enough that people can age in place, using technologies and universal design strategies so that you can actually make simple changes as your lifestyle needs change. So what does this all mean? Well, we really need to be putting this into perspective and thinking about, okay, not only the improvements we need to make, but what does that mean? What are projections for the future saying about climate change, about the impact that's going to have on storms, et cetera, and how can we address that? So a couple of the student teams looked at these new trends. The Berkeley University of Denver team actually was saying, you know what? After years and years and years of us moving out of cities, people are starting to move back into cities. This is a really good thing with regard to sustainable development. So they had a model for a home, a single-family home at the Decathlon that could actually be stacked so that it could become a multi-unit housing that could also include community amenities in the heart of the city. A couple of the solar decathlon teams said, what are our challenges? What is it that we need to face? So University of California at Davis said, water. Water in California is a huge issue. How can we address that? And really looked at encouraging through lifestyle reduced energy needs. University of Alabama, tornadoes. What do we do? How do we design for that? And so they designed their survival house to illustrate and to show people what can be done in order to make those improvements. So what does that all mean for you all? Hopefully I've done a little bit of a call to action, although I guess, you know, I probably had an interested audience to begin with. But I kind of like the fact that on the UN Sustainable Development Goals website, you can click on the Lazy Person's Guide to Saving the World. And I trust with this audience that you're all probably already doing that anyway. So what more can you do? We're working right now in order to bring together the team for the latest solar decathlon competition. Race to Zero competition. Thank you. Sorry. Race to Zero competition. Because we want to be able to have an impact in our community and not bring our homes to Denver, we're concentrating on the Race to Zero competition rather than the Solar D. Both really great learning opportunities for students, bringing together the necessary different disciplines that have to be talking to each other to realize the changes that we're making. So in the room today, we've got Sarah Klein-Tableau from the Pennsylvania Housing Research Center. They help us to manage everything about the solar decathlon, or the race to zero. Sorry, trying to finish up quickly for you. And Chris Hazel, who is a two-time racer. He was involved in the last two competitions with Cher and others in the room. He is now staffed with EEHR, the Energy Efficient Housing Research Group, and he is helping to pull students together for this year's Race to Zero competition. So the competition this year, we're really trying to ramp it up. So we're working very, very closely with S&A Homes, the largest producer in the region of housing. They're building thousands of units here and in Carlisle every year. And they've given the team their two top-selling models of homes and are working closely with them to realize what can be done in terms of changing the details of those homes so that they can be net zero energy or net zero energy ready. So there is, the student team is coming together now, thinking about what are their priorities going to be between now and when the competition happens out in Denver, in Golden, Colorado at DOE in April. And there'll be classes and other opportunities to get involved throughout the year. So I invite you to talk to any of us if you're interested in participating in the Race to Zero team. And as I hope you saw, there's lots of stuff happening across campus. So you can reach out to us in the Hamer Center at EEHR, and my email and Chris's email is up here. Pennsylvania Housing Research Center is in the room. There's representatives that are working with David Riley on the Tiny House project, on the Grid Star project, and lots of other things that he is doing in the area. And those of you who are interested in specifically in renewable energy, there's the American Solar Energy Student, American Energy Society ACES student chapter that's very active on campus. So I encourage you to take action, to get involved, because it's your brains, you are the future that's actually going to allow us to realize this. So with that, I thank you. Sorry I took too much time. That was inevitable, but please ask any questions.
All right, so let's give a round of applause for Lisa Iulo. So at this time, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions. If you could explain like your opinion on, it sounds like whenever you're building these sustainable houses, the goal is to think about the environment and where you're building them, whether that's in a city or in like a beautiful landscape, as you said, versus the trying to change like people's behavior in the house and like just being more sustainable in general. What's the balance between that? Is the goal like more changing people or adapting to them? Does that make sense?
I think so. There's a lot embedded in that question. So first and foremost, with regard to development, we need to really be favoring not building on what are called greenfield sites, building outside of development areas. There's so much land that is underutilized in urban cores where we already have transportation in place, where we have infrastructure in place. We should really be favoring development in those places in order to enhance density and other things that are going to hopefully allow for more sustainable development. The other part of your question is a really hard one because it's cultural shifts. The fact of the matter is the housing industry is really, really, really slow to change because we've been doing things the way that we do it for so long, and it works, and we know how to do it, and it sells. So, you know, a lot of it is cultural shifts, but hopefully through passion from people like you, but also through design, realizing that we don't need to make compromises and actually engaging in conversations of what do people need in order to realize better designs, that we can slowly come around to say, you know what, this actually doesn't have to impede my quality of life. It can improve my quality of life. So I'm not sure there's I have a direct answer to that, but again, I guess it's that call to action. You know, we all need to do what we can do.
Lisa, do you mind if I add something to that?
Please, Chris.
So to add to that, I heard behavior, and that's one thing of we can design the most efficient home possible, but if people are still using them incorrectly, it's not going to make big of a difference. So we're right now with the land trust home also thinking about how do we educate the homeowners, how do we educate people around here, and in part of that, how do we monitor the energy usage of these homes? We've read studies that just having an in-house monitor of how much energy you're using can decrease your energy usage by 10 and even 20%. And so that's part of, again, what is the lazy person thing to save the world? You know, think about how much energy you're using already in your home. Making sure you turn off the lights, maybe drop the thermostat by a degree or two. All of these things are going to really add up. And you know, as Lisa said, building new homes is already adding a lot of energy, a lot of greenhouse gases. What are things that we can do with our existing homes to just make them more efficient without having to really change our lifestyle and just being aware of what we're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a really good point. And that's really what we're trying to do with EEHR, with the feedback loops that I talked about. That really came out of reflection on the solar decathlon. Great experience for students, really unbelievable research opportunity, but what was the impact that we were able to have? And so saying, how can we actually learn from what we've done? What has worked? What is not working? And how can that feed back into it? So really understanding education and engagement and performance as a part of this bigger picture and looking at it longer term. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, we'll have a few minutes for them to stick around if people want to come up individually. But thank you guys for coming out. Be sure to stick around for next Friday and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.